Hey everybody, Reverend Matt here, and I'm the Connectionalist. And today I want to talk about an important topic, and that is sexism coming out of the Christian church in America right now. A lot of it, especially online, is very problematic. And Trent Horn put out a great video about this. And so I just want to go ahead and dive on in. I just did a video critiquing something Trent Horn did, but I watched enough of this Trent Horn video to know where he's coming down on it. And I can tell you, I can mostly agree with it, but I want to be more in dialogue with the piece itself. So let's go ahead and dive right on in. Make sure you go like and subscribe to Trent Horn over at the Council of Trent. Let's dive in.
After socialist candidate Zoran Mamdani won the New York City mayoral race with the support of 82% of young women,
a little bit.
Some people on the right have talked about repealing the 19th Amendment that gives women the right to vote.
Right.
They say this is the only way to restore goods like the true meaning of marriage and legal protection for the unborn. But in today's episode, I'll show why this kind of rhetoric has the opposite effect and will make it harder to push back against evils like sodomy and abortion.
So Trent's kind of coming at this from a utilitarian, or like a pragmatic perspective, where he's like, well, we shouldn't be sexist in the church because it's actually going to end up thwarting our conservative agenda. And my kind of approach is we shouldn't be sexist because we shouldn't be sexist. I don't know if Trent would necessarily agree with that summation of it. But when you start out your argument by saying, you know, we can't be super sexist because it'll end up thwarting our conservative agenda, it also makes it seem like giving women equal place in society is not a high priority for you. But I don't necessarily think that's maybe what he meant. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. But that's just kind of how it comes across at face value. But regardless of the intention, I think the outcome of what Trent is trying to say here is good.
So let's take a look at a common argument in favor of repealing the 19th Amendment. Here's Protestant pastor Dale Partridge in a clip that has been seen over 4 million times on X.
Yeah, Dale Partridge, not great.
Is it good that women can
Not great.
vote in America? I don't think so, and here's why. Nearly every legalized moral atrocity of the last 100 years was made possible by the female vote.
Absolute ridiculous lie. Well, because I guess you can't say lie because it's not based in fact. Okay, it is really more of an opinion. So let's back up and say absolute ridiculous, misleading statement and ridiculous opinion.
Abortion
And Trent's going to very quickly tear it apart.
and homosexuality would likely still be illegal if not for the female vote. Mass immigration in the welfare state rode on the backs of the female vote. Nearly every
As if creating welfare safety nets in America is bad, right? You see, the whole thing with like Dale Partridge's argument here is you have to, like, the assumption he wants you to begin with is that you're also a Republican, basically, which is a huge problematic way to approach a theological debate about whether women should vote or not, right? From a Christian worldview, he's like, women voting made the welfare state, made Social Security a thing. It's like, well, that's not, he's assuming you think that's a bad thing. And I don't think Social Security is a bad thing. I think it's got problems that probably need to be fixed, but I don't think social safety nets are a bad thing.
modern Democrat, including Obama and Biden, were elected because of the female vote. Even last night, the new Muslim New York City mayor Mamdani won specifically because of the female vote.
However, many people who make this argument against women voting aren't consistent. They say women tend to vote for bad things like pro-abortion liberal politicians, and so they shouldn't be allowed to vote. However, young people as a whole are much more likely to vote for these bad things than women as a whole.
Yeah, that is true. Now, I don't necessarily agree with Trent that everything he has said is a bad thing, because we obviously disagree on policy around those things and our theological opinion on those things. But he is right that it's an inconsistent opinion because young people also make up a large voting block of those kinds of issues.
Mamdani won because of his support among young people, not women in particular.
Yeah.
2/3 of men under the age of 45 voted for him, on par with the rate of women between the ages of 30 and 45.
Right.
Women under 30 went for Mamdani at a higher rate, but they aren't a very large voting bloc.
So when you say something, when you look at this data, this is from CNN, when you look at this data and you see women 18 to 29 went 82% for Mamdani, and 30 to 44, 64%, and then you see men went for men between 18 and 44, 65% went for Mamdani, but then you blame everything on women. That's the definition of a disgusting sexist opinion, because what you're doing is you're reading into the data to find the conclusion you want to find, which is that women should be subordinate. That's what you've already concluded in your heart and concluded in your life. And the problem with that is that it ignores the other evidence, which then makes your argument sexist instead of pragmatic.
We can also see this in previous presidential candidates, including Donald Trump, who did not win the youth vote in any of his elections. Even in 2024, young men under 30 were basically split between Harris and Trump.
Yeah.
So by that logic, should we repeal the 26th Amendment and raise the voting age to 45 or 60 to make sure liberals don't win?
Yeah. I'm actually, if somebody sat me down and looked at me and said, we're going to raise the voting age back to 21 or to 25, I wouldn't immediately be against that. My issue always with that has been that military service is 18. And so it's kind of ridiculous to allow people to fight for the country but not vote. That was the essential argument that got it lowered from 21 to 18. But certainly before the prefrontal cortex is developed, which is in your mid-20s, I do think there are a lot of people between the ages of 18 and 25 who understand policy really, really well. And there's a lot of people over 25 that don't. But there are pretty big disadvantages when you're super young to understanding the way the world works. And so I wouldn't be necessarily immediately against putting it back at 21. But I probably would end up not supporting it just because military service would not also be moved to the age of 21, because they love that high school pipeline in the military. The military is never going to do that because they love that. They love getting them right out of high school so they can form them in their image, right? The military is never going to want to do that.
African Americans are much more likely than women to vote for pro-abortion liberal politicians.
Right.
The racial gap is way more prevalent than the gender gap in elections. So by that logic, should we repeal the 15th Amendment and only allow whites to vote? Now there.
Yeah. He's getting to the core of the issue. He's saying, like, if your goal is that Democrats never win, then you should stop just saying women can't vote, and you should go ahead and say blacks can't vote either. So what he's trying to expose is that their argument is actually not pragmatic. It's just straight up sexist. It's not pragmatic. It's just sexism.
There are anonymous online accounts who would say yes, but who cares what anonymous trolls think?
Absolutely, Trent. Who cares what anonymous trolls think? You and I can both agree on that.
What's more interesting are people like Dale Partridge or Joel Webbin who publicly say we should repeal the 19th Amendment. So I messaged them the following question. Since people under the age of 40 and African Americans support liberal pro-abortion politicians at higher rates than women, do you support repealing the 15th and 26th Amendments to eliminate their right to vote? Webbin didn't reply to me, but Partridge answered my question.
Yeah, Webbin didn't reply because he's a ridiculous person. He should not be taken seriously at all. I don't really think Dale Partridge should either, but Joel Webbin certainly is apostate. Just he's a troll and a grifter and shouldn't be taken seriously. I'm sorry.
And so,
like, I disagree with, like, Trent, right? I disagree with like Dr. Gavin Ortland, who I watch a lot of his videos, and I have great respect for both of them. Great deep respect, because they're not grifting. People like Joel Webbin are just grifting.
This. Men of every color should have the right to vote and represent their household within a republic. So
So what he's saying is Dale Partridge's logic doesn't even count then, because you're saying, oh, women, they should be subordinate. But I think Dale would push back and be like, well, but that's because what the Bible says about women being subordinate to men. That's what his argument would be.
He didn't support repealing the 15th Amendment. When it comes to age, Partridge said this. As for the 26th Amendment, I believe age alone is a poor standard for determining voting eligibility. A wiser approach would consider factors such as marital status, children, land ownership, education, years as an American citizen, and ideally religious affiliation.
This is pretty disgusting opinion. So basically, everybody who's like me should be able to vote, and everybody who's not like me shouldn't. This is what I define as Christian nationalism. This is where you want to remove everybody who's not like you and exactly like you from participation in the republic. And while the church should have a great deal of influence on the republic and how the republic functions, you cannot cut out minorities and people who do not wish to follow Jesus out from participation in the process of the republic. That is not what defines a good citizen of a republic, and it's just frankly gross. Basically, marital status, children, land ownership, education. Basically, this is what he says. A wiser approach would be to consider factors. Consider factors. Let me go ahead and translate this for you. He should have said a wiser approach would be to only let married people vote who have children, who own land, who have an education, have been American citizens for a certain period of time, and are Christian.
So unless
That's
you're willing to be
like, I would be shocked if that is not Dale Partridge's opinion based off of that text. I'm not saying it is, but I would be shocked if that's not what he means by saying that.
A full-blown racist who denies black people the right to vote. You can't consistently say that women should be denied the right to vote simply because in the past few decades their demographic. You can't full-blown racist affiliation. So unless you're willing to be a full-blown racist who denies black people the right to vote, you can't consistently say that women should be denied the right to vote simply because in the past few decades their demographic tends to vote for liberal policies.
Right.
You need an argument based on applied principles, not an argument from estimated outcomes to show women should not be allowed to vote. I cover some of those arguments in a previous episode I'll link to below, including the claim that men risk more for society in dangerous jobs, and so only they should be allowed to vote.
It's dumb, yeah. And he's probably going to say here because like women risk their bodies in childbirth. That's a huge risk that men don't have to do.
But this doesn't explain why men with cushy jobs should still get the right to vote, or why women who take on bodily risks like giving birth shouldn't be allowed to vote when they're the ones who allow society to perpetuate over time at all.
Absolutely.
When it comes to arguments I didn't cover in that episode, Andrew Wilson has claimed feminism is incoherent when it says rights don't really exist and that women have the right to vote. Here's how he put it on the Whatever podcast back in May.
So I want to be very clear. You're going to see a clip here from Andrew Wilson. He had an incident a few days ago that was absolutely disgusting. And I actually think he's been completely disqualified from any kind of public ministry ever again, or at least for a very, very long time. He said some of the most vile, nasty slurs at a woman over and over and over again. Here's the thing. There's no amount of debate that justifies that kind of speech. He is disqualified from doing public apologetics, in my opinion, for the foreseeable future. Absolutely disgusting, vile stuff. But this video was published before that happened, I think, or Trent would not have put him in the video.
Forced doctrine is a doctrine which I came up with, which tries to describe a phenomenon which you yourself are going to have to concede is true. That half of the world right now, if men decide to, they can basically exterminate every single woman inside of their nations, and there's not a damn thing women can do about it. And
what a weird thing to say. This is like an odd thing to sit around and be like, I created a doctrine. If you think about it, we could kill all the women on the planet. It's like, like if somebody said that at a party, everybody's looking at me like, dude, get out of here. What is a weird thing to say?
Because of this forced doctrine application, women's rights all come from men, not
No. Rights come from God.
Inherently from themselves. Therefore, feminism is a lie.
What a bad argument. That is a terrible argument. I was going to say dumb. So it is kind of a dumb argument too. Just because the men can all of a sudden kill all the women, they shouldn't be able to vote?
Complete lie. That's forced doctrine.
And just to be
what an arrogant spirit as well. I'm sorry. It's just gross.
Clear, Wilson is not saying he endorses men annihilating women. He's making
it. I don't think he is either, but that's a really creepy, weird thing to say.
An internal critique of feminism. His argument is that if we don't
also, this is in light of his most recent comments, so
don't have inherent rights, then rights come from the state. Specifically, they come from the men who protect the state in law enforcement and the military. Therefore, feminists can't complain if the source of their rights takes away their rights. Now, I agree with Wilson that it's incoherent to say we have no natural rights and that outlawing abortion violates the presumably natural right to control one's body. But a feminist could just tell Wilson that, unlike natural rights, social rights don't have to come merely from a brutocracy or rule.
Also, why aren't we having the argument about how rights come from God, right? Like, he just articulated how rights are coming from the state and therefore men, but he's not talking about how rights come from God.
By the strong. They can be part of a collective social contract that everyone, even the strong, recognizes better than brutocracy. For example, in a true brutocracy, the rights of the weak come from the will of the strong, regardless of sex.
No, in no situation ever do rights come from anyone other than God. God grants you your rights, and it's up to the state to secure those rights and to acknowledge them. They are not the source of the rights. They are the securer of the rights that God has given to each and every individual.
In such a society, the rights of physically weaker men, like the elderly, the disabled, or even men who aren't in the top tier of strength and can't open a random pickle jar. Like
he's dunking on Andrew Wilson. He's like talking about forced doctrine. Men are so tough, and then he can't open this pickle jar. Yeah.
Wilson. Their rights would come from stronger men who can do things like open a random pickle jar.
Wow. That
but
was
the
brutal.
strongest 10% of society couldn't unilaterally control the weaker 90%, because even if you are individually weak, there's still strength in numbers, as noted in this great scene from the 1998 film A Bug's Life.
Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life.
Given this reality, everyone might prefer a social contract where more people have a say in government, which reduces the need to have to constantly threaten force over other people to get your way. So neither the argument from bad voting outcomes nor the internal critique argument show women shouldn't be allowed the right to vote. But what about a more principled argument? Some who advocate for Christian nationalism say women shouldn't vote because there is a natural order where only households can vote, and households are represented by husbands and fathers. Well, the Bible doesn't have a teaching on voting rights, since those are a recent part of history.
Right.
Likewise, the Catholic Church was originally wary of voting at all.
Wonder why that is. Probably because they were going to lose a lot of their power.
Be it for men or women, since male voting is also a recent phenomenon in human history. But once women gained the right to vote, this was something the church supported, as can be seen in Pope Pius XII,
Right.
who said in 1945 that it is a strict obligation on all entitled men and women to take part in elections. Household voting would be something you'd have to support with a prudential argument. It's not something from divine revelation or church authority.
That's true. Because liberal democracies are so recent on the world stage.
Tries to support this argument by saying men must lead because women are more susceptible to making bad decisions.
Women are twice as likely to men to be seduced into an affair. They are 26% more likely to be financially scammed online. They are 3 times more likely to fall prey to psychics and tarot card readings and astrology and mediums. The same emotional vulnerability that shows up there also shows up in politics.
But you can make the same
Yeah, but men have weaknesses that women don't have too. I don't think he's going to address that.
argument against men being trusted with the right to vote.
Right.
Some studies say that men and women get equally scammed, while others show that men are more likely to be scammed. Other studies show that because men are bigger risk takers,
Here we go. Yes, this is absolutely true.
when they are scammed, they lose more money than women.
Because men are bigger
being more
risk
likely to
takers
take
on
risks
average.
is a good thing. It fosters exploration and discovery. But it's a bad thing when men are more likely than women to end up in the ER or the morgue because of their risk taking. So the argument for men and women's capabilities also isn't persuasive.
I think, by the way, a lot of people are like probably watching this like, no, there's no difference between the genders. I think anybody with eyeballs knows that there's a difference between the genders on average, right? You're going to have female risk takers and you're going to have men that don't like taking risks. But on average, anybody who's lived on this planet for a certain amount of time has noticed there's a difference between men and women. Like everybody knows that like the most likely person to die in a cliff jumping accident at the lake is probably a dude, right? Like not saying it's 100%, just saying, somebody looks at me and says, right now for $1,000 in my hand, the person who just got hurt in a cliff diving accident was a man or a woman. You would be really silly not to say the man because they are much more likely to get hurt and stuff like that because men are dumber on that stuff. So,
but even if you did implement household voting, it wouldn't change much. Married women are only slightly more liberal than married men. The real problem with Western countries is that unmarried women and unmarried men are both more likely to support wicked policies and politicians. However, if only households
And what I don't like about this, though, is just being like wicked policy and wicked politicians just because they're Democrats. That's what he just basically intimated, which is just hugely problematic. It's so bad for the discussion in the country right now. It's just so bad for it. It's just not everybody can be painted with a monolithic brush. It's not helpful.
are allowed to vote, then what is the difference if these unmarried households still vote? This is why I asked Partridge the following question. Do you believe an unmarried man or an unmarried woman living on their own outside their parents' home would qualify as a household that is allowed to vote?
I hope so, because if not, Jesus and Paul would not have qualified.
To which he responded, no, I do not believe an unmarried man constitutes a household. However, I do think that there should be an exception for unmarried qualified men serving in the military.
See, this is what I'm talking about. This is like not a principled argument. It's just like, yeah, I want unmarried men to be able to vote if they're in the military. This is just like, this is what I talk about when Christian nationalism, where it's like the state and military service and militarism are all lifted up as like higher values, like as if military service as a man is the only thing you could do as a single man that would give you the right to vote. When, like, guys, I've met a lot of people in the military. I know a lot of people in the military. It's incredibly honorable to serve in the military, but it's not the only thing that makes you honorable. And there's a lot of people I know that served in the military that are not honorable in any other area of their life, and they shouldn't, probably qualify for this one caveat, right? But there are so many other things that make somebody qualified and honorable. And this is what Christian nationalism looks like. When you say Jesus and Paul would not have been allowed to vote, which even in Paul's day as an unmarried man, he was allowed to vote. He was a citizen of Rome. He was not vote, but he was a citizen because they weren't doing a lot of voting. He was a citizen of Rome, and he had the rights of being a citizen when not a lot of people had it, and he was unmarried. And so this is essentially a more regressive opinion than the Roman Empire had 2,000 years ago. That's how insane this argument is. It's more regressive. But unmarried men who are serving in the military, that's militarism. That's saying the service in the military is somehow the most honorable thing a man can do, which is a ridiculous claim.
As their service.
It's a ridiculous claim as a Christian. It's a ridiculous claim. I don't think it's necessarily a ridiculous claim from like a secular viewpoint, because military service, I think, is very honorable. But from a Christian perspective, to say the only people in my Christian worldview that get a caveat and are allowed to vote if they're unmarried is if they're serving in the military, basically means you think military service should be put above everything else, which is militarism, when you're a Christian, is one of the great identifiers of a Christian nationalist viewpoint.
Demonstrates
because you're lifting the state and militarism up above your Christian principles, which is what Dale Partridge is doing. He's lifting his nation state and his militaristic viewpoint of the world above his Christian principles. He doesn't know that he's doing that, but I think that's what he's doing, which is incredibly problematic and is sinful, frankly.
Duty and responsibility worthy of representation. And of course, Partridge thinks unmarried women don't constitute a household either. My point, though, is that it's ironic that nearly all the unmarried men who supported Partridge's video online would be unable to vote under his ideal system of government.
Yeah, Trent's smirking here because he's like, all the dudes online that were like, based, this is Chad and based or whatever, they're all unmarried dudes because they're emotionally unregulated and they're online, terminally online and emotionally unregulated. And so a lot of them are single because they're not in a state in life where they're attracting women and able to start a family. And so all these people who are like, oh, this is based, don't know that actually under what Dale Partridge is proposing, they're going to lose their right to vote. They have no clue until obviously Trent has showed that that's what Dale thinks. But yeah, he's smirking because he's like, this is ridiculous. Why are we even having this conversation?
But here's my bigger concern. How do you convince 50% of the population, or probably 80 to 90% under Partridge's plan, to vote, to give up their right to vote?
You never will. That's why it's a ridiculous waste of time. An absolutely ridiculous waste of time, which tells you because it lacks so much pragmatism, it's not pragmatic at all, and it will literally never happen. Because it lacks so much pragmatism, it is probably more about Dale Partridge. Like, the purpose behind him saying that is to be flashy in my opinion, is to be flashy and to grift and to get attention more than it is to actually propose a pragmatic solution to the problem. I think it's more about him just getting his TV time.
Partridge says, if we can overturn Roe v. Wade, we can repeal the 19th Amendment.
No. Roe versus, okay, let's talk about how ridiculous that is from a governance standpoint. If we can overturn Roe v. Wade, we can repeal the 19th Amendment. Let's talk about how that works in this country. Roe versus Wade was a 1970s Supreme Court decision that could be overturned, and it was by Dobbs versus the Mississippi or Jackson Health. I can't remember the exact thing, but it was overturned by the Supreme Court. Overturning a 50-year-old precedent is quite difficult in the American system. Overturning Roe versus Wade was the final piece of a 50-year-long campaign by conservative jurists and people with conservative jurisprudence to overturn what they felt was a bad decision in Roe versus Wade. Difficult, but not impossible. Repealing the 19th Amendment requires a vote of 2/3 of the House and the Senate, and then it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures. 38 states have to sign on to that. So you have to get an amendment through with a 2/3 vote. Half of Congress is women. Like half the people in Congress are women. So you have to get a 2/3 vote through the House and the Senate to take women's voting rights away, and then 3/4 of the states to ratify it. That is a ridiculous. If we can get, that's a ridiculous statement. If we can get Roe versus Wade overturned, then we can repeal the 19th Amendment. Repealing the 19th Amendment is infinitely more difficult than overturning Roe versus Wade. And you want to know how I know that? Because Roe versus Wade got overturned, and the 19th Amendment hasn't, and will never. It will literally never happen, barring some kind of armed revolution, which is what scares me about some of these folks, because they feel like that's going to be their only option.
But while over 200 Supreme Court cases have been overturned in history,
Right.
only one constitutional amendment has ever been repealed.
Yeah, the prohibition of alcohol was repealed because everybody knew it wasn't working, and it was literally unenforceable, and it increased black market crime. That amendment wasn't to repeal a right. It was to repeal the prohibition of alcohol, which is two different things. Way more politically feasible to overturn prohibition than it was to take half the country's voting rights away. Unbelievably dumb.
Specifically, the 18th Amendment, which banned alcohol sales.
Right.
It was overturned 14 years later because the law
21st Amendment,
couldn't be enforced due to organized crime, and the government really needed tax revenue from alcohol sales during the Great Depression.
That's true. Yeah.
Realistically, you'd have to spend several generations converting people to a traditional view of Christian society until a supermajority, at least 80%, would vote for it. But by that point, you wouldn't need to take away people's right to vote, because most people, men and women, could be counted on to vote for the right thing.
All right.
The problem with repealing the 19th Amendment to address our social problems is that it cannot be implemented when its defenders say that it's needed. And when it could be implemented, it's no longer needed to achieve its defenders' goals. So I'm asking online Christians, please stop saying stuff like this. It's not going to lead to the social change that you want. All it does is give ammunition to our ideological opponents. Christians who talk about repealing women's right to vote are like liberals who talk about abolishing the police or abolishing prisons.
Right. It's just like a ridiculous extremist opinion. Like, some of the most progressive people I know don't say abolish the police or abolish prisons. Like, no one, I don't even know how they get these articles published, because like no one really thinks that. Like, everybody knows we have to put people in prison. Everybody knows we need the police, right? And when you say things like that, yeah, all you're doing is giving ideological ammunition to your opponents. That's all you're doing.
Their practically impossible proposals make it easier for critics to write off the more practical proposals that are out there and say they're all just rantings of a lunatic fringe group. Also, it just makes us look like a bunch of whiners. I can't win in the marketplace of ideas, so I need to outlaw the competition.
Yeah, I agree.
The most practical thing we can do as Christians is to encourage men and women to get married and have children, because this naturally moves people towards conservative positions on issues related to life and sexuality.
That actually is true. That's proven in the data.
But it's hard to do that when you spread rhetoric online about how women are too dumb to be a public part of society.
Yeah.
This stuff makes men and women think that their lives are better off without each other, when God made men and women to be complementary reflections of his divine love through their matrimonial bonds. So instead of trashing other people made in the image and likeness of God, As Christians, we should trash the lies that our culture has been feeding us. This includes the lies peddled to women that men in marriage inhibit their happiness, as I cover in my previous episode on the real problem with childless cat ladies.
Look at that thumbnail. Can we just take a minute? There's a lot going on. We got Trent making a face. We got Taylor Swift on the front of a magazine, and then Pope Francis. It's quite a thumbnail.
And the lies peddled to men by far-right grifters that marriage will lead them to a life of misery, as I showed in my debate with Pearl. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to be part of a great event...
Yeah, pretty good video. I obviously disagree with Trent on, like, the need for what he would like to see policy-wise in the country play out completely. Obviously, we're going to have some disagreements on, but what I agree with him on is that nothing is coming out helpful from these kinds of arguments that are like, let's take women out of the workplace of, or the marketplace of ideas. It's just ridiculous. It's sexist. It's sin. It's unhelpful. We really, really have to focus on making sure everybody understands that they're created in the image of God, that they're in possession of sacred worth, that their rights matter, that what they have to say as a part of our society matters, because God says that they matter. So thank you, Trent, for making this video. I really, really appreciate it. Make sure you go like and subscribe to the Council of Trent. Trent does a really great job with general apologetics, Christian apologetics, but also Catholic apologetics, which I don't want to become Catholic, and I think you should be a Protestant, but I think he does good Catholic apologetics. It's very helpful to understand the Catholic position. It's very helpful. So make sure you go like and subscribe to him and give him your support. If you like my commentary today, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way that you can help a young and growing channel like mine. But I'm River Matt, and I'm the Connectionalist, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.